They resisted against it using like it says their massive resistance, which were political plans, as you said, to expand segregation.
Mhm.
And then we went into like the Bird Organization and the Great Commission explaining how they helped keep schools segregated. And we ended with the Stanley Plan, it looks like, or yeah, the
Yeah.
Stanley Plan,
Okay.
where they shut down all the schools.
Yeah. Yeah. Great job, Virginia. Nicely done. Yeah. So Virginia decides rather than integrate the schools, they just shut it all down. Yeah. So Virginia has kind of an extreme reaction, but basically all of the South is going to have a very similar reaction, right? A very similar reaction. Um, let's move over to let's take a stroll over to Alabama, shall we? We'll come back to schools in a moment, but we need to pick up with Alabama. This is Mississippi. All right. So what's the next number we're on?
T.
T like Thomas?
Yes.
Okay. All right. T like Till. Look at that. All right. Okay. So and I think if I'm correct, we also are outside of the realm of what you guys did last year, right? We've passed what you did last year in class. So this is probably pretty new for you, though maybe you did it in government class. All
I
right.
think
So say it again.
I think we did this in Gov at least a little bit.
A little bit. Yeah. All right. So probably all right. So let's talk Emmett Till. All right, Emmett Till is the boy in the picture here. He's the boy in the picture. He's 13 years old and he's from Chicago. It's important for the story that he's from Chicago. All right, as a 13-year-old boy from Chicago, he's in Mississippi visiting his aunt. He has an aunt and uncle that live down in Mississippi in a little town called Money, Mississippi. They live down in that area. And he's down visiting with some cousins and they're staying with the aunt and uncle. It matters that he's from Chicago because Illinois is not a segregated state. So Emmett Till is not used to living in a segregated state. He's not used to living like that in a segregated world. And so he doesn't have those psychological implications that we were talking about in class the other day. Right? He doesn't have that psychological stuff that we were talking about. He doesn't have specifically what I want you to say is he doesn't have learned deference. He doesn't have learned deference. Okay. What do you think learned deference means? That phrase, learned deference? Yujia, you know what the phrase learned deference means? No? Mike, can you help her out?
I guess it's to being taught to be deferred or like inferior.
Okay, so that's mostly correct, right? You're being taught to be deferential, which means that you are subordinating yourself to another person, right? That you're recognizing the other person is above you. Now, we have learned deference in a lot of ways, right? You guys have all been taught to have learned deference towards a teacher, right? Which is why you call me Mr. Veenstra instead of Dave, right? You have learned deference towards your parents. That's why you call them mom and not, Sarah, right? You have learned deference towards police officers normally. You have learned deference towards people of authority, right? We have learned deference towards, a president or something like that. In the case of segregation, the unprivileged group has learned deference towards the privileged group, in this case, Black towards white, right? And they are taught that every time they encounter a white person, you turn your eyes and you look away, or you don't make eye contact, or you just say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, right? Like that's the behavior pattern that's taught all children. Emmett Till doesn't have that. Okay, he's from Chicago, and so he grew up living like a normal life where you don't have to do that all the time. And so he doesn't do it all the time. And so he walks around in Mississippi. acting like a normal person, which is going to kind of set off the white population that they're going to be really uncomfortable with this uppity black kid from the north, right? This is going to come to a head one day in August when Emmett Till is in a grocery store that Carolyn Bryant, the woman right here, Carolyn Bryant works in this grocery store. Now she's about 21 when this happens and he's 13. According to her, she says that Till whistles at her. Wolf whistles is what we would call it. That he wolf whistles at her, like, right? And she also testifies in court later that Till was like, come on, baby. Yeah, you want some? Come on, baby. Talking like that. Now, based on what we know so far, what's the likelihood that Till is guilty of this?
Really low.
Yeah, basically zero, right? Basically 0% chance likelihood that he's like this. And if you've ever met a 13-year-old before, how many 13-year-olds have the kind of confidence to walk up to a woman and go be like, hey, baby, you want to get some? Right? Like, have you ever met a 13-year-old? They're like the worst people in the world, right? They're like the most awkward people in the world. They could never do that. Okay. Anyway, she says, according to her, she says that she feels sexually threatened and that Emmett Till is going to commit sexual violence against her. She tells her husband, Roy, and Roy goes into a rage about this. Okay. Roy gets together with his buddy and Roy Bryant gets together with his buddy and they decide that it's time for them to lynch Emmett Till. They go to Emmett Till's aunt and uncle and they basically force themselves into the house. The aunt and the uncle are pleading with these men, leave him alone, he's just a boy, he's from the north, he doesn't know what's going on. They tried paying him off, but it doesn't work. Okay, the men force Emmett Till out into the back of their pickup truck. They pistol whip him and knock him unconscious, and then they drive him to a barn. They take him to the barn and they proceed to torture him. They proceed to torture and beat him. An eyewitness hears this happening. An eyewitness hears this happening in the barn, but doesn't. He hears crying. He hears crying and stuff from the barn, but he doesn't do anything about it. The men eventually beat Emmett Till to within an inch of his life. They beat him so badly that his skull is completely collapsed and it doesn't even look like a face anymore. And then they shoot him. They steal a fan off of a cotton gin, like a big giant like steel fan, that blows the air, like blows air, right? They steal a big fan off of a cotton gin and they tie it to Emmett Till's body. They shoot Emmett Till and they drop him into the river. So he sinks to the bottom of the river. Here's the men, J.W. Millam and Roy Bryant. This is the picture after they win their court case. A manhunt goes looking for Till. The manhunt is being led by Medgar Evers. You guys remember Medgar Evers? Look in your notes. We had him a couple times ago. He was in the section on veterans. Find him? Yash, who is he? Who's Medgar Evers?
It says he's the first Black man to attend the University of Mississippi, who was the leader of the Mississippi NAACP.
Yep. So Medgar Evers is leading the manhunt, and he's also with Amzie Moore, who should be in the same group. Who's Amzie Moore?
He's a part of the SNCC, and he wanted to fight back against discrimination and segregation.
Yeah. And he leads a voting drive in Mississippi. Okay. So Amzie Moore and Medgar Evers are leading the manhunt. They eventually find Emmett Till 3 days later. They start to dredge the river, and they dredging the river with like hooks and stuff, you know. It hooks onto the fan and they bring up the body. Emmett Till's body is right here in the picture. Normally, by society, you would never show someone's body like this. But Emmett Till's mother, the woman in the picture, mom and her Emmett Till's stepdad, they mom insists that her boy's picture be published. She says, it's important that the country sees what they did to my boy. It's important that they see what he did to a 13-year-old boy. His picture, and including other pictures that are even more explicit than this one, his picture gets shown in the newspapers in Chicago, where he's from. And they also get shown in Jet magazine, a black magazine that gets published across the country. And from there, it starts getting shown in other black newspapers and stuff around the country. This is going to cause a massive, massive uproar across the entire United States. Black communities all around the United States are going to cite Emmett Till's murder as an emotional incitement, an emotional trigger that gets them going. Okay, it's kind of like George Floyd. It's kind of like George Floyd is for 2020. That George Floyd's murder triggers a whole bunch of activation across the country. Same kind of a deal here. Okay, when we're talking about the importance of Emmett Till's murder, that's what you need to be able to say. Emmett Till's murder is important because it inspires action across the country. A lot of civil rights leaders are all going to cite Till's murder as the reason why they get involved. It activates them. Till's murder is followed by a trial. Okay, the outrage makes it so that Mississippi has no choice. They arrest Millam and they arrest Bryant. They arrest these two and put them on trial. Okay, Carolyn testifies. She's the primary witness that testifies. But Till's elderly aunt and uncle, they're both in their 60s. Till's aunt and uncle both testify as well. So does the witness that heard him at the barn, right? They testify. The all-white jury throws it out in one day. The trial is done in one day. The all-white jury throws it out, and these guys are found not guilty. Now, for those of us who've looked at lynching, this should not be very surprising, right? Unfortunately. But again, this becomes a huge activation. Later on in life, much later in life, I'm talking like 5 or 6 years ago, Carolyn is going to recant her story. She recants her story on her deathbed. She's like a 90-year-old woman at this time period, right? 90-year-old woman. She recants her story similar in like during the Obama administration, right? And she says that she made the whole thing up eventually. And she says that just a couple of days before she dies. That she made it all up and that it was fake. Okay. So, do we have questions about Till? Are you all confident in your ability to describe why Till is important in an essay question? Okay. All right. So let's move to Alabama now. Okay, we're going to go to Montgomery, Alabama. Let's make this our next big number. Our next big number, which should be what? Q, S, T? What's the next big number, guys?
I think it's Q.
T?
No,
T?
we just did.
We did T like Thomas?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're saying U like umbrella?
Yeah.
Okay, so big number U. Big number U, Montgomery bus protests. All right, so Montgomery, Alabama, home to Rosa Parks. She's going to be entering our story shortly. All right, but we need to put some context on Rosa Parks first. Okay, so we're going to go back in time slightly. All right, so Till was murdered in August. He was murdered in August of 55. Let's jump back to March of 55. Okay, March of 55, a young girl named Claudette Colvin, she sits down in the bus and refuses to get up. The white bus driver tells her to get up and she refuses, and she says that she's going to protest and stay in her seat. The white bus driver has her arrested and she goes to jail. Sound familiar? Right? Sounds familiar? Okay. Claudette Colvin is explicitly trying to start social movement. She's trying to start a group of people to do this. She's trying to start a boycott. She's trying to start a movement, but nobody listens to her. The problem is Colvin is 15. She's only 15 years old. Okay? Nobody wants to listen to a teenager. If you guys have ever met teenagers before, if you've ever met a teenager, you're going to know that teenagers are kind of terrible, right? They're kind of the worst. Am I right, Mike? Yeah, teenagers are kind of the worst, right? And so she's 15. It's really easy for the newspapers and stuff and the press to just write her off as a troublemaker, right? They just say, oh, she's a troublemaker. She's just some punk teenager causing trouble, right? And this is made worse by the revelation that she's pregnant. Not only is she 15, she's a pregnant 15-year-old. She's a pregnant 15-year-old, and so she gets basically smeared in the news as basically just some punk kid. Okay? The next month in April, Ariella Browder, an older lady, she's in her 40s, an older lady does the same thing. Sits on the bus, refuses to get out of the bus. Okay? But again, nothing happens, no greater movement happens because she's not really connected to the civil rights movement. She doesn't really coordinate anything. She doesn't really know what's going on, right? Again, nothing happens, okay? And then in your story, put a ... Till is murdered, right? Because I want to connect the time period here. I just wanted to present the four ladies all together because thematically they're linked, right? But Till is happening between Ariella and Susie, right? Between Browder and Susie. Okay, so Till is right here in the story. Okay, by October, after Till's murder, after people are activated, after people want to do something, we get Susie McDonald's and Mary Louise Smith, both in October, both try to do the same thing. Both of them refuse to get off the bus. Both of them get arrested. Okay, again, it's thrown out basically because they're 18 and 17. Again, teenagers. Okay, all four of these women are going to be combined into a court case called Browder v. Gale. Browder v. Gale, which will go in front of the court the next year. Okay, June of 56. And the NAACP is going to take up their case, right? But it doesn't do it right away. It picks up the case later on. McDonald, Smith, and Colvin all take part in the case. Colvin, McDonald, and Smith take part in the case. Browder backs out of the case because of white intimidation. White people are basically threatening her and stuff, and so she backs out. But Colvin, McDonald, and Smith stay in the case, and they actually win the case eventually. Browder v. Gale rules in favor of the girls and says that Alabama was not legal. It was not legal for Alabama to do what it did. So that's good, right? But let's enter Rosa Parks, because we have to, what we're establishing here is with these four women, we're establishing that the idea of a bus boycott is already in the minds of Alabama, right? It's already simmering in the minds of the people of Alabama. It's already coming, okay? Now, Pooja, if you think back to elementary school when you learned about Rosa Parks,
Yeah.
what can you tell me about Rosa Parks, about the Rosa Parks story?
From elementary school?
Sure.
Oh yeah, the story they told us was like, oh yeah, so she sat on like the bus because she was really tired, and then like a white man asked her to move, and she refused, and then like the bus driver like stopped the bus, she was arrested, and then like soon after that the bus boycotts followed. I think that was like the story.
Okay. How many of you guys, and Pooja, that's kind of the most basic version of the story. It's most basically correct, right? How many of you guys raise your hand if the version of the story that you had always been taught in elementary school was that Parks was basically a little old lady who was tired, and that the movement was kind of happening around her, right? That a movement gets going after her, basically. How many of you guys heard that version of the story, some version of that version of the story, right? Pooja, I'm going to assume your hand's up too. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I want to disabuse you of that. I want to disabuse you of that myth right away. Parks is not a little old lady. Parks is in her 30s. Okay. She's not tired. She's a civil rights activist. Okay. So let's put Parks where she deserves to be. She deserves to be in charge of her own story. Okay. She's not a neutral actor. She's not someone that's being acted upon. She is a leader. She is an actor in the story. All right. So I want you to make sure that she's the leader of her own story. Okay. So first of all, she's not old. She's in her 30s. Second of all, she was actually a member of the NAACP for like 20 years prior to, well, about 15 years. She had been a member of the NAACP for about 15 years. She joined with her husband, Raymond. Raymond and Rosa joined together, and they worked together with the NAACP. She was a secretary for the NAACP, but she actually worked with them, and she actually was the primary investigator in some sexual abuse cases that the NAACP was working on, where they were dealing with women who had been raped and stuff, that she was the person talking to the women and gathering evidence and gathering testimonials and stuff. She was part of the movement. So let's be clear, she's not just some little old lady, okay? She's a part of the movement, and her husband is too, okay? Her husband is not that important of a person in the story. Her husband actually ends up being the guy who's like serving drinks at the meetings and stuff, right? He gets overshadowed by his wife, but that's fine. That's fine. He's a good supportive husband, just like all the other supportive wives of history. Okay, so she's a driver of the story. Okay, she also specifically cites Emmett Till. She says, after Till's murder, I became active again. She had kind of, become inactive for a while. She had kind of like just kind of became, a wife and a mother and stuff. She's been working as a seamstress. So she like sews dresses and she's a tailor. She sews clothes. But after Emmett Till's murder, she starts to meet up with all of these other people. Okay. She starts meeting with E.D. Nixon right here. E.D. Nixon is the head of the NAACP for Alabama. He's the head of the Alabama chapter of the NAACP. And she's meeting with Fred Gray, who is like the second in charge of the Alabama NAACP. He's a very prominent lawyer. Okay. Very prominent lawyer. These two men are meeting with Parks. They're also meeting with some friends that Parks has had for a long time, Virginia and Clifford Durr, right? She's an organizer for the NAACP and he's a lawyer for the NAACP. Okay, Durr was on the team that argued Brown v. Board, in fact. Okay, they're meeting with all this group, and then they also welcome in a young preacher who is from Georgia, who just moved to Alabama, but he's very promising. His name is Martin Luther King. Nobody knows about him yet, but they think he's a big deal. They think he's got a lot of promise. Okay, from Georgia, he just moved to Alabama. Parks starts hosting these people in meetings in her house, right? She's having meetings in the basement of her house, or in the back room of her house, and she's planning on what they're going to do. Okay, now bus protests are already in the air. Alabamans are already kind of, their antennas are up, they're thinking about buses, right? And they all agree that the buses are probably the good place for them to do this, right? Schools are being fought in some other places, let's fight buses here, right? They're trying to fight it on multiple cases, okay? But they realize the problem with the buses so far is that it hasn't been the right person. Who does it have to be in order for the bus protest to work? Kira, who does it have to be?
An adult and probably a woman, because it's easier to disagree with men and like paint them as villains.
Right? Also, what's going to happen to a man if he does this? What's likely to happen to him? Yeah, Drew?
Oh, sorry, I thought you were still asking me.
Oh, yeah, Drew, you
He's
got
only
it.
likely to get what's that?
He's likely to get what?
And he's likely to get lynched probably if he was
Yeah.
a man.
Yeah, if it's an adult man, Kira's right that the adult man is just not going to garner sympathy, right? And an adult man is very likely to be lynched, right? There's a very good chance of that happening, right? But a woman probably won't be lynched. It can't be a teenager because you can just dismiss a teenager. It has to be a middle-aged woman who's respected in the community, who is deferential, who's polite, right? Who has a clean criminal record. It has to be Parks. So she starts to plan it. They start planning this thing. They take over a month to plan this out. I don't want you, the way that people tell the story is that the story is just like, she just happened to be tired one day. She's not. She's not tired one day, right? She's planning this thing out, okay? So she has to think to herself, who's the bus driver? She has to find the bus driver who is going to be the most racist, the most overreacting bus driver she can find. It has to be him, right? It has to be someone like that. She finds her man, a guy named James Blake. I didn't put his picture on here because we don't care about him, right? But she finds her man in James Blake. James Blake is a racist jerk who likes to be cruel to black people on the buses just because he can be cruel, right? Like he'll make the black people walk to the front, pay the money in the front, and then they have to leave and walk around the back and enter through the back door of the bus. And he likes to just drive away in front of them and splash water on them and stuff. He likes to do it, especially when it's raining, right? And he's particularly cruel. He's particularly nasty. He cusses people out and stuff like that. And Rosa thinks, found our man. Okay. She also knows it has to be a Friday. It has to be a Friday because what they're going to do next, right? This is not random. She's planning it out, right? She knows it has to be Blake. She knows it has to be a Friday. She knows it has to do this. And so it works. She actually stays late at work. She normally takes the 6 o'clock bus home, but she waits for the 6:30 bus because she knows that's the one Blake's driving, right? She watches this guy for weeks. She knows his work schedule. She knows what his route. So she takes his route. And she also knows that normally the bus is full after 3 stops, right? So they arrange for the bus to be full right away, right? They're not taking chances with this. And so they get a bunch of other black people to get on the bus and they fill the back of the bus. And she sits in the front. She sits in the front of the black area. Now they had a little portable sign that when the bus, white people lose all their seats, they pick up the portable sign and they move it to the seat back. And then the black people have to get up and move in the back and stand, right? And so when the bus driver gets up to move that sign and he moves it back and he says, you need to move back, Rosa looks at him and she says, no, sir, I don't think I'm going to. And he says, what was that? And she says, sir, I'm really tired and I'm not going to leave my seat. Right? This is where the I'm really tired part comes in. She says, I'm really tired. My feet kind of hurt. And I don't much feel like getting out of my seat today. Sir, thank you very much. And he starts to yell at her. And she just sits there. And so he storms off the bus, storms into the store, like across the street, calls the cops, comes back, and he says, the cops are going to come. And she says, well, if that's what you think you need to do, then that's what you need to do. Then the cops come and they say, we're going to arrest you. And Park says, well, sir, I'd prefer that you didn't. I prefer that I just be allowed to sit here, but if you need to do what you need to do. So they arrest her. They take her into the police station, and they take one of my most favorite pictures in all of American history. This picture of Rosa Parks smirking at the camera in the police station. This is not the face of a little old lady who's tired. This is the face of a young, smart, vibrant, cunning woman who knows that she just started a revolution. Right? She's looking at that camera and she's like, you dumb racist bastards don't even know what you have started. Right? She knows exactly what she started. Okay? She's the driver of her own story, and you can see it in her eyes. So they give her a fine. She pleads not guilty. She pleads not guilty. They give her a fine. They send her home, and then we're off to the races. The next day, Saturday, Professor Joanne Robinson enters our story. Joanne Robinson enters our story. She's a professor at Alabama State. She's the organizer for the Women's Political Council in Alabama State. It's a civil rights group that fights for women's rights and fights for equality for everybody, right? Joanne Robinson is not arrested in this part of the story. This picture actually comes from a later protest, but I like this picture also because she has the same kind of look on her face as Rosa does, because she's like, you guys don't even know what you're starting. You don't know who you're messing with, right? I love people who get arrested on purpose to drive social change. It's one of my favorite things in the world. I love it, right? So Joanne Robinson, she's one of the organizers that meets. Edie Nixon, the head of the NAACP, is going to show up on Monday morning as Rosa's lawyer. She's not just bringing a lawyer, she's bringing the #1 ranking Black lawyer in the entire state, the leader of the NAACP. She's bringing with her the most powerful civil rights legal organization in the country. It's not a mistake, right? Joanne Robinson publishes a pamphlet that they immediately get out to all of the churches, right? All the churches. Yujia, why don't you read it for us? Yujia, we can't hear you. No good? All right, Ilha, go. Go, Ilha, go.
Another Negro woman has been arrested and thrown in jail because she refused to get up out of her seat on the bus for a white person to sit down. It is the second time since the Claudette Colvin case that a Negro woman has been arrested for the same thing. This has to be stopped. Negroes have rights too. For if Negroes did not ride the buses, they could not operate. 3/4 of the riders are Negroes, yet we are arrested or have to stand over empty seats. If we do not do something to stop these arrests, they will continue. The next time it may be you, or your daughter, or mother. This woman's case will come up on Monday. We are, therefore, asking every Negro to stay off the buses Monday in protest of the arrest and trial. Don't ride the buses to work, to town, to school, or anywhere on Monday. You can afford to stay out of school for one day if you have no other way to go except by bus. You can also afford to stay out of town for one day. If you work, take a cab or walk. But please, children and grown-ups, don't ride the bus at all on Monday. Please stay off all buses Monday. Joanne Robinson.
Excellent. So Robinson doesn't sign this at the time, but we know afterwards that it's her, right? It gets credited to her later. I put her name on here. At the time when she prints it, it's printed without a name, okay? But they print this off, thousands and thousands and thousands of copies of this, and they get it to every single Black church in Montgomery, Alabama, every single one of them, okay? This is an important part, an important thing that you need, because the organizing principle for the South is churches, okay? The primary organization that they use to get the movement going is churches, Black churches in the South. In the North, it's largely from labor unions, but in the South, it's Black churches, okay? And they get this going. This works wonderfully. On Monday, no Black people ride the buses at all. Now, this may not seem that big of a deal to you guys. You guys aren't reacting, but you should be reacting, okay? The Black population is 80% of the bus riders. 80%. Okay, that means that Montgomery, Alabama will be operating its buses at a loss. They will lose 80% of their profit that day. Okay. The bus protest is supposed to be one day. It works so well that it lasts 381 days. Okay. It works so well. The white community is so freaked out by it, by this image of hundreds and hundreds and thousands of Black people walking to work, walking along the roads, riding bikes, carpooling, taking taxis, right? Thousands and thousands of Black people. In fact, this actually starts gaining speed throughout the year. Okay. Ralph Abernathy, right here, he's actually going to take control of a lot of this. Ralph Abernathy is a reverend, and he's from Montgomery, Alabama. And the people of Montgomery, Alabama know Abernathy really well, right? He is like one of the leading reverends in Alabama. Here's Martin Luther King at his Mount Zion Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Okay. King is young and he's new. He's not from Alabama. He's from Atlanta, right? But very quickly, Abernathy, who was the leader of the organization, passes it off to King. Abernathy recognizes there's something special about this young man, right? But Abernathy is the one with the local connections. King is the one with the rising star charisma, okay? They get together and they organize a group called MIA, the Montgomery Improvement Association. And the Montgomery Improvement Association is going to be the political organization that's going to coordinate between the churches and coordinate between the different groups. Okay. The MIA starts to collect money from Black communities all across the country. Okay. Black taxi drivers start charging only 10 cents a ride for Black people, because that's the cost. That's the basic cost of fuel, right? So Black people are riding for as close to free as possible. And Black communities from Chicago, New York, Detroit, Baltimore, they're all sending money down to pay for taxi rides to make sure that no Black people ride the bus. Okay? And then in June of '56, Alabama loses its court case. That's when they lose the Browder v. Gale case in June of '56, in the middle of the bus boycott, right? But Alabama refuses to listen to the courts even after they lose. They continue the boycott for 6 more months, okay? Pretty soon, Alabama is operating at an 80% loss for the entire year. Montgomery, Alabama is going to go bankrupt if they don't solve this problem, okay? Because the buses are costing more money than they're making through the entire year. Okay, this is a kind of force that no one was expecting, right? They were not expecting this to happen, and eventually Alabama caves. December of 1956, Alabama caves. At the end of December, they have to cave, because if they start one more month with an 80% loss, they're not even going to be able to pay their city employees, because the buses have eaten up the entire budget of the entire city, right? They just can't do it. They're going to have to sell the buses. They're going to have to sell the buses. They're going to have to fire all the employees. They're going to have to do something, right? So they open the buses up again, and the Black people start riding again. Victory. You guys should really get more into this victory. Come on now. Come on now. Yuja, I appreciate at least you seem to be into it. Everyone else is just waiting for me to be done. All right. This victory is a huge, massive success, right? I love this story. I love this story because it's a story of how you can enact a massive social change without actually hurting anybody, without destroying anything, right? And it's a coordination of, powerful, smart women and all these men who are recognizing the power of other people and stepping down and stuff. Like it's a good story. It's a good story. All right. This is one of the big successes in the early movement. Okay, let's do one last thing and then we're done. What time do we got? No, we're done. All right, so we're going to end here. We're going to end here because there's our bell. All right. So do you guys have any questions or anything before we move on?